Hey, welcome to the Actor's Career Compass, where we give actionable, bite-sized tips to help you navigate your acting career. I'm your host, Martin Benson, and today we're going to be talking about actor types. So what does the word type even mean? Well, an actor's type is essentially your physicality. Like, what do you look or sound like? How old are you? What kind of roles would someone who looks like you be able to play best? Your type is basically determined by what you look like, sound like, and how you act or move, and even the type of clothing that you wear. But before we discuss specifics, I want to explain that type most often comes into play for smaller roles, like co-stars, or in some cases, guest stars, but most of the time it's like co-stars and featured background actors, where you either have like just a line or two, or you're doing something specific in a scene, even if you don't have a line, but you have a particularly important part to a scene, which would be sort of a featured extra or featured background. For larger roles, whether it's in films or television or whatever, most casting directors, they don't necessarily cast based on type, especially these days. It's very much in the process of changing, which is awesome because honestly, type is, where do you think the word type comes from? It almost comes from stereotype, right? And sometimes it's kind of bad. So they are now starting to cast against type, but as you build your career, you have to start with those smaller roles. And so in order to do that, you have to focus on type when you're getting those small roles, especially in bigger projects like union productions. You definitely want to focus on type. The reason that they want to cast based on type, especially for those smaller roles, is just because they want something that's not going to distract from the story. Like, for instance, if you look significantly, let's say, younger, like if you're only in your 30s or 40s, and you get cast as the role of a grandfather, well, the audience who's watching it might just be confused and they'll be taken out of the story because they're like, well, why does this grandfather look so young? Suddenly they're thinking about that instead of following just the story. However, if it's a much larger role and you're a young grandfather, well, they might have time to sort of explain why you're so young, or the audience at least gets to follow the storyline and really, understand you as the young grandfather type of character. So that's why this primarily just applies to smaller roles. But let's discuss some specifics about what defines type, okay? So first off, gender, right? So fair or unfair, whatever gender you are, people generally have some preconceived notions about the types of roles that you're more likely to play in life. So, for instance, many people are going to assume that a babysitter should be more often played by a woman as opposed to a man. And remember, whether you personally agree with this doesn't really matter, unfortunately, because it's just the way that those small roles are being cast still frequently. And it's in the process of changing, but we're talking about it. The goal of today's episode is not to discuss whether it's right or wrong, but to just show you how you can use type to help advance your career. The second thing that goes into type is age range. So, for instance, if you're very young, as I mentioned earlier, you're probably not going to be cast as a grandfather or even like as a judge character, because more typically those are played by people who are older. And on the other hand, if you're very old, then you're unlikely to play a student or an intern. Again, there's plenty of students in real life who are older and even interns who are older, but it's just less likely. So your goal is getting clear on the types that you can play based on how you look and act and all of that, what we're going through, to know where you'll have the highest shot at booking roles so that you can make sure to tailor your marketing materials for that and book as much acting work as possible. So the third thing that goes into type is obviously ethnicity, race. As I said before, stereotypes, they do play into actor types as well, unfortunately. So, you may find people of certain backgrounds or a look being cast more often as like a criminal or a computer programmer or whatever. And, it's just crazy. I mean, luckily it's in the process of changing, but just keep in mind as you're thinking about your type that ethnicity and race does play a role in the types of characters that you might want to focus on. Next is body type. So if you're overweight, for instance, chances are slim that a casting director would want you to play the role of a personal trainer, right? If they're supposed to be a very fit personal trainer, or just basically any personal trainer who comes in and maybe has a line or something, but that's it. Because if you look significantly different than most people's, thought of what a personal trainer should look like, then the person watching the film or whatever is going to be confused and be like, wait, why is that personal trainer look like that? On the other hand, if you're very thin, you might be more likely to get cast as a role as a sick patient or something. Now, we also talked a little bit earlier about clothing. So clothing is number 5. If you frequently wear suits and ties and you're wearing that in your headshot, then you're probably going to be considered for like a business professional type of role. Whereas if you wear hoodies, you might be invited to audition for something less professional and more casual. Voice is another thing. So if you have a very high-pitched voice, you're unlikely to get cast as, say, a leading man or lady in something, and that's just because many people tend not to want to see someone with a high-pitched voice playing that type of leading role. Now, again, that's not all the time, because there might be a film or a project that's specifically focused on a character with that type of voice. But the point here is to understand what you look and sound like and see where that fits in, so that you can aim to get as many bookings as possible, build up your resume, and then eventually, once you have enough credits and weight to your name, you can break out of your type and play anything you want to, because people will just love you for who you are. Okay? So, interesting aside with voice, there's been a number of cases where actors have deliberately made their voices sound deeper, like saying like, "Hi, my name is Martin," versus "Hi, my name is Martin." And they just do that to increase their likelihood of booking lead roles. For instance, I know one specific example of, I believe Jensen Ackles in Supernatural did lower his voice, especially in the beginning seasons, because his voice was higher pitched when he was younger. And he made his voice deeper just to fit the character and be more of a leading man type of role. It's obviously not super common, but it is occasionally done. The last thing with type, number 7, is physical mannerisms. So if you talk with your hands and you make big gestures, for instance, you might find yourself more often getting auditions for like sales people. Whereas if you have something else, like say a hunch in the way that you stand, you might be more likely to be called in for a character who's depressed. Just these types of things all kind of combine to give people an impression of what kind of characters you can best play. Now, the acting industry is probably the only industry where this sort of blatant discrimination is still somewhat tolerated. I mean, you literally get hired based on what you look like, how you talk, all of that. And honestly, until the day comes where type isn't a thing at all anymore, instead of pretending that it doesn't exist and just applying to every possible role, I generally recommend trying to figure out the crossover of both the kinds of characters that you fit into, like physically, and what you can play well, but at the same time, just doing the ones that you most enjoy playing. So you might find that you can play like 20 different types, but maybe like 10 of them are like things that you would hate doing, or that you feel are offensive, or you don't want to be associated with, whatever. We all have different preferences. So don't play those. Don't focus on those. Focus on the types that you feel you could play, but that you would also love playing because you're going to do those best. And that's where that crossover point comes. And then again, as I said earlier, you slowly build up your credits and your resume, your footage, all of that. And then eventually you can break out of your type and play whatever because people will want to see you for who you are, not just, see you playing roles that they have these preconceived notions in. And obviously, as you start to play larger roles too, not those just small one-liners where type still comes into play, it will definitely be easier to focus, on anything really. So before we wrap things up here, I want to just tell you briefly about our headshot packages for actors, because once you're clear on the types that you can play best, I usually recommend focusing on about 3 or 4 key types, that you can play most. At that point, you want to redo some marketing materials for that. So you want to shoot new headshots. You want to put together some clips of you performing that type of character. And essentially, you just want to show that you're an expert or a specialist on those types. So we can help with that. My team at City Headshots, we specialize in helping actors capture specific types in headshots. We have 2 locations. One is in Manhattan and one is in northern New Jersey. And we can capture your types very, very clearly in professional actor headshots. So if you visit actors.cityheadshots.com, that's actors with an S and then a dot, and then City, C-I-T-Y, headshots, also with an S.com. Actors.cityheadshots.com. You can check out our packages there and schedule a shoot. So to sum up, remember, the more specific you are with the character types that you can play, the more likely you'll be to book an acting job, because casting directors are very busy and they don't want to take chances on people that don't look or act like the characters that they want. And again, this is in particular to focus on those roles that just are smaller roles. Actors who try to be versatile, as they would call it, wind up instead coming off as generic. And unfortunately, they wind up appealing for no specific roles and always struggle to book work because no casting directors are ever casting for a character named Generic Person 1 unless it's for a background role. Okay. So really, the more specific and clear you are on your types, the easier it will be to get auditions and book them, because you can also become a specialist and you'll feel much more confident in your work if you know the kinds of characters that you play best, right? So that's kind of a summary of type. Just if you're wondering, the word brand is a different thing than type. Brand involves bringing in your personality and making something uniquely you. So we'll be talking about brand in a future podcast episode. Type is more of the specific physicality-based stuff and, somewhat messed up, really, that they still do that. But it is going to be helpful if you can be specific, and then eventually you won't have to worry about that anymore once you have enough credits under your belt and you have an agent, all of that. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening. And all I have is one ask of you, which is if you have not already, please subscribe to the show so you don't miss future episodes. All you got to do is search for the Actor's Career Compass on, you could look up Spotify or even Apple Podcasts, and you can just subscribe there. This way you don't miss future episodes, and it also helps me when you subscribe because it makes these episodes more easily searchable and findable for other actors as well. So thank you so much, and I will see you soon.